1. The Brazilian coast, a world of suffocating green, where the air is thick with the scent of rot and life, and the jungle hums with a million unseen things. For Hans Staden, a German gunner in the service of the Portuguese, this was the edge of the known world. While on a lone hunting expedition, the familiar sounds of the forest suddenly went silent. From the shadows emerged a group of warriors, their bodies painted in geometric designs of red and black, their hands holding bows and heavy wooden clubs. These were the Tupinambá, a tribe known and feared along the coast, allies of the French and sworn enemies of the Portuguese. For Staden, a man in the wrong uniform in the wrong place, this was a death sentence. He was dragged to their village, a place called Ubatuba, to await his fate. The Tupinambá were rumored to be cannibals, to not just kill their enemies, but to ritually devour them. For 9 months, Hans Staden lived as a captive, under the constant, terrifying threat of being the main course at the next tribal feast. He was surrounded, outnumbered, and stripped of all weapons. How does a man survive not just the physical dangers of the jungle, but the psychological torment of knowing that the people around you see you as food? Staden's survival was not a matter of bushcraft in the traditional sense. He wasn't building shelters or finding water. He was engaged in a far more complex and dangerous game, a battle of wits, culture, and faith. Tools to trust. Skills that last. This is Bushcraft Arsenal. Number 1. Mastering cultural intelligence and adaptation. When Hans Staden was captured, his most powerful weapon was not a gun or a knife, but his mind. He was an outsider, a barbarian in the eyes of his captors. To survive, he had to shed his European arrogance and become a student of Tupinambá culture. This was not a matter of simple curiosity. It was a life-or-death intelligence-gathering operation. He observed their daily routines, their social structure, their religious beliefs, and, most importantly, their political alliances. He quickly learned the complex web of rivalries that defined the region. The Tupinambá were at war with the neighboring Tupiniquim tribe, who were allied with the Portuguese. This was the key to his predicament. Because he was captured while serving the Portuguese, he was automatically considered an enemy. He also learned that the Tupinambá were allies with the French, who were competing with the Portuguese for control of the Brazilian coast. This single piece of political intelligence would become the cornerstone of his first survival strategy. Staden paid close attention to their language, learning key phrases and understanding the nuances of their communication. He watched how they interacted with each other, how they showed respect, and how they displayed aggression. He learned about their rituals, their songs, and their stories. This deep cultural immersion allowed him to move beyond the role of a simple prisoner. He began to understand the why behind their actions, to see the world from their perspective. This knowledge was power. It allowed him to anticipate their reactions, to understand their motivations, and to craft his own behavior in a way that would maximize his chances of survival. He was no longer just a captive. He was an ethnographer, a spy, and a cultural chameleon. He was learning how to think like his enemy, but thinking like them wasn't enough. He had to convince them he was one of their friends with their friends. Number 2. Strategic deception and identity manipulation. Knowing that the Tupinambá were allies of the French, Staden's first move was a calculated lie. He was not a German in the service of the Portuguese, he insisted, but a Frenchman, a friend. He tried to use their shared enemy, the Portuguese, as a bond. This was a high-stakes gamble. If they believed him, he might be treated as a guest rather than a prisoner. If they didn't, his deception could be seen as an insult, hastening his journey to the cooking pot. For a time, the ruse seemed to work. The Tupinambá were intrigued. They had traded with the French, and they valued their iron tools and weapons. A Frenchman in their midst could be a valuable asset, but Staden's lie was put to the ultimate test when a French trader, a man he had hoped would be his salvation, visited the village. Staden, believing his moment of rescue had arrived, eagerly approached the trader, expecting him to confirm his story. The Frenchman, however, either not understanding the gravity of the situation or simply unwilling to get involved, denied Staden's claim. He told the Tupinambá that Staden was not French, but a Portuguese prisoner. This was a catastrophic failure. The deception had been exposed, and Staden's credibility was shattered. The Tupinambá were furious. They had been made to look like fools. The threat of death, which had briefly receded, now returned with a vengeance. Staden had to think fast. He had to abandon the identity of a Frenchman and create a new one. He began to emphasize his German origins, a nation that was neutral in the conflicts between the French, Portuguese, and the indigenous tribes. He presented himself not as an enemy, but as a third party, a man caught in a conflict that was not his own. This constant shifting of identity, this manipulation of his captor's perceptions, was a masterful display of psychological agility. He was playing a deadly game of chess, using his own identity as the primary piece. His lies had failed him. He was exposed as an enemy. With his credibility in tatters, he needed a new way to prove his value. He couldn't rely on his nationality, so he had to find another source of power. Number 3. Intelligence gathering and strategic information sharing. Hans Staden was a soldier. He understood the value of information in warfare. Trapped in the heart of his enemy's territory, he transformed himself from a simple gunner into an intelligence operative. He listened to the conversations around him, piecing together fragments of information about tribal politics, troop movements, and strategic plans. He was no longer just a prisoner, he was a spy, operating in the most hostile environment imaginable. His breakthrough came when he overheard whispers of an impending attack. The Tupinambá's mortal enemies, the Tupiniquim, were planning a large-scale raid. Staden, understanding the gravity of this information, made another calculated gamble. He went to the chief, Kunambebe, and warned him of the coming attack. He claimed that his god had revealed this to him in a vision, a clever way of framing his intelligence coup in a way that his captors would understand and respect. This was an incredibly risky move. If the attack didn't happen, he would be exposed as a liar once again, and his life would be forfeit. But if he was right, he would prove himself to be an invaluable asset. The tribe waited. The tension in the village must have been unbearable. Staden's life hung in the balance, dependent on the actions of an enemy he couldn't see. Then it happened. The Tupiniquim warriors attacked, just as Staden had predicted. The Tupinambá, forewarned, were able to mount a successful defense, repelling the invaders. Staden was no longer just a captive. He was a prophet, a man with a direct line to the supernatural. His status within the tribe was transformed overnight. This was a turning point. Staden had demonstrated his value in a way that transcended his identity as a Portuguese ally. He had provided actionable intelligence that had saved lives. He had proven that he was more useful alive than dead. He had become a weapon, and the Tupinambá were not about to discard a weapon that had proven so effective. He had saved them from their enemies, but he still had to save himself from his friends. Number 4. Establishing spiritual authority and religious manipulation. Having proven his ability to predict the future, Staden leaned into his new role as a holy man. He understood that the Tupinambá were a deeply spiritual people, and that their world was governed by a complex web of beliefs and rituals. He began to attribute every significant event, both good and bad, to the will of his Christian God. This was not just a matter of faith, it was a calculated strategy to gain power and influence. When a wave of illness swept through the village, affecting the chief, Tupinambá, and his household, Staden saw his opportunity. The tribe's own shamans were powerless against the sickness. Staden stepped forward and claimed that he could heal them through the power of his god. He prayed over them, performing the rituals of his own faith in a way that would have been both mysterious and impressive to his captors. Miraculously, the chief and his family recovered. The effect was immediate and profound. The Tupinambá, who had been ready to eat him, now saw him as a powerful healer, a man who could command the forces of life and death. Staden began to weave a complex narrative in which he was the chosen servant of a powerful and vengeful deity. He told the Tupinambá that his god was angered by their threats to kill and eat him. When a prisoner who had been particularly vocal about wanting to kill Staden suddenly died, Staden used it as proof of his god's wrath. He created a direct link between his own well-being and the fortunes of the tribe. If they treated him well, his god would be pleased, and they would prosper. If they harmed him, his god would be angry, and they would suffer. He was no longer a helpless captive, he was a conduit to the divine, a man who held the fate of the tribe in his hands. This was a dangerous game. He was playing with fire, manipulating the deepest beliefs of his captors. But it was a game he had to play. In a world where he had no physical power, he had to create a different kind of power. A power that was based on faith, fear, and the perception of divine favor. He had become their priest, their prophet, and their protector. He had made himself indispensable. He had convinced them that his life was sacred, but he was still a prisoner, and he knew that his newfound status could evaporate at any moment. He had to find a way to turn his spiritual authority into a tangible path to freedom. Number 5. Acting as a go-between and translator. Hans Staden's survival was a masterclass in making oneself useful. Having established his spiritual authority, he now leveraged his unique position as a man who understood both the European and the indigenous worlds. He became a go-between, a cultural and economic bridge between the Tupinambá and the French traders who occasionally visited the coast. This was a role that required a delicate touch, a deep understanding of both cultures, and a constant awareness of the shifting political landscape. When French ships arrived, Staden was the one who could communicate with them. He translated the desires of the Tupinambá for iron tools, weapons, and trinkets. He negotiated the terms of trade, ensuring that his captors got a fair price for their goods, which included Brazilwood, parrots, and monkeys. This was a position of immense trust. The Tupinambá, who had no understanding of European languages or customs, relied on him completely. He could have easily used his position to betray them, to negotiate his own escape, or to swindle them in their trades. But he didn't. He understood that his long-term survival depended on maintaining the trust of his captors. He served their interests, and in doing so, he served his own. This role as a go-between gave him a degree of freedom and mobility that was unheard of for a prisoner. He was allowed to move about the village, to interact with different members of the tribe, and even to participate in their trading expeditions. He was no longer just a captive. He was a valued member of the community, a man who brought prosperity and access to the coveted goods of the outside world. He had transformed himself from a liability into an asset, from a piece of meat into a key economic player. But this was a dangerous game. He was walking a tightrope between two worlds, and a single misstep could have been fatal. He had to be careful not to appear too eager to help the French, lest he be seen as a traitor. He had to be careful not to drive too hard a bargain for the Tupinambá, lest the French abandon them as trading partners. He was a diplomat, a negotiator, and a cultural broker, all while living under the constant threat of being eaten. He had mastered the art of the deal, but he still hadn't found a way to buy his own freedom. Number 6, building relationships with key individuals. In any survival situation, the human element is paramount. Hans Staden understood that his fate was not in the hands of the tribe as a whole, but in the hands of a few key individuals. He focused his efforts on building a personal relationship with the chief, Tupinambá. This was not a matter of simple friendship, it was a strategic alliance, a way of securing a powerful protector in a world where he had no other allies. Staden did this by making himself indispensable to Tupinambá. He was his translator, his prophet, and his healer. He used his knowledge of the outside world to advise the chief on matters of trade and politics. He used his spiritual authority to give the chief a sense of security and divine favor. He created a bond of mutual dependence. Tupinambá needed Staden for his skills and his connection to the supernatural. Staden needed Tupinambá for his protection. This relationship was tested time and time again. There were many within the tribe who still saw Staden as an enemy, a piece of meat to be devoured. They resented his influence, his strange customs, and his close relationship with the chief. They plotted against him, spreading rumors and trying to turn the chief against him. But Tupinambá, who had been healed by Staden, who had seen his prophecies come true, and who had benefited from his skills as a translator, stood by him. He became Staden's champion, his shield against the factions within the tribe that wanted him dead. This is a crucial lesson in the psychology of survival. It is not enough to be strong or skilled. You must also be able to build alliances, to find common ground with those who hold power, and to turn enemies into protectors. Staden's relationship with Tupinambá was the cornerstone of his survival. It was a testament to his ability to read people, to understand their needs, and to forge bonds of trust in the most unlikely of circumstances. He had found a friend in a world of enemies, a protector in a world of predators. But even the most powerful chief could not control the desires of the entire tribe. Staden knew that his life was still in danger. He had to find a way to escape, and he had to do it without betraying the man who had saved his life. Number 7, psychological resilience and the unbreakable will to live. For 9 months, Hans Staden lived on the brink of death. Every sunrise brought with it the possibility that this would be his last day on earth. He was surrounded by the constant reminders of his own mortality. He witnessed the ritual killing and cannibalism of other prisoners. He was taunted, threatened, and paraded as a future meal. The psychological pressure would have been unbearable for most men, but Hans Staden was not most men. His final and most important survival skill was his own mind. He possessed a level of psychological resilience that is almost impossible to comprehend. Staden's resilience was rooted in his faith. He was a devout Christian, and he saw his ordeal as a test from God. He prayed constantly, not just for his own survival, but for the strength to endure. His faith gave him a sense of purpose, a belief that his suffering was not meaningless. It was a powerful psychological anchor in a world that had been stripped of all certainty. It allowed him to maintain his sanity, his dignity, and his hope, even in the face of unimaginable horror. But his resilience was not just a matter of passive faith. It was an active, conscious choice. He refused to give in to despair. He refused to become a victim. He was constantly thinking, planning, and adapting. He was a master of improvisation, turning every situation, every piece of information, every interaction into an opportunity to improve his chances of survival. He was a survivor in the truest sense of the word, a man who refused to be broken. In the end, his opportunity came in the form of a French ship. He had to make a split-second decision to seize the moment and make a run for it. he escaped, leaving behind the world that had been his prison for 9 agonizing months. He returned to Europe, a man who had been to hell and back. He wrote his story, not as a tale of adventure, but as a testament to the power of faith and the resilience of the human spirit. His book, True History and Description of a Country of Wild, Naked, Grim, Man-Eating People, became a bestseller, a window into a world that was both terrifying and fascinating. It is a story that has captivated readers for centuries, a story of survival against all odds, a story of a man who looked death in the face and refused to blink. Conclusion: Hans Staden's story is a chilling reminder of the brutal realities of the 16th century Atlantic world. It is a story of cultural collision, of violence, and of the constant struggle for survival. But it is also a story of incredible ingenuity, of psychological fortitude, and of the power of a single individual to shape his own destiny. Staden was not a passive victim of circumstance. He was an active agent in his own survival, a man who used his wits, his faith, and his deep understanding of human nature to navigate a world that was determined to destroy him. His 7 survival skills, cultural intelligence, strategic deception, intelligence gathering, spiritual authority, acting as a go-between, building relationships, and psychological resilience, are a masterclass in the art of survival. They are a testament to the idea that in any survival situation, the most powerful weapon is not a gun or a knife, but the human mind. Staden's story is not just a historical curiosity. It is a timeless lesson in the power of adaptation, of resilience, and of the unbreakable will to live. Let me know in the comments which of Hans Staden's survival skills you think was the most impressive. Was it his ability to manipulate his captors, or his unwavering faith in the face of certain death? See you in the next episode.